Welcome to a PRI's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Itchron, Senior Vice President. Now, each year, we traditionally do a holiday gift book recommendation list, but it's usually a blog piece that's posted on our blog right by the bay. But this year, we thought we'd try something different. Each PRI staff member is going to talk about their book recommendation right here on the podcast. And as an added treat, we're also going to provide a wine, beer, or cocktail recommendation for the holidays. We thought this would be a fun way for listeners to get to know other PRI staff members. And, there's actually a lot going on behind the scenes to make our work possible. And of course, it also gives us a chance to thank those of you who support us in helping us to provide the ideas and the reforms that we believe will bring more opportunity, more freedom to our fellow Californians and all Americans. So we're going to go first with our fearless leader, Sally Pipes, President and CEO of PRI. So start us off, Sally.
Thank you, Rowena, and I'd like to wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving, and thank you for participating in our podcast today. My favorite 2022 book is not a policy book, but Her Majesty, A Photographic History, 1926 to 2022. Published by Taschen and edited by Raoul Golden, this coffee table book is a definitive history containing amazing photos of Queen Elizabeth's incredible public and private life. She was the world's most famous monarch and loved by so many around the world. Having served as Britain's monarch for 70 years, she surpassed the long reign of even Queen Victoria. She passed away quietly on September 8th at the age of 96 at her favorite place, Balmoral Castle in Scotland. In these times of high inflation, a long pandemic, and political upheaval, this book is a breath of fresh air and well worth getting a copy. It is so wonderful and so relaxing to read. Now, going on to drinking, my favorite wine happens to be rosé, and I'm delighted today to be enjoying Sonoma Coast Sojourn 2021. It's a rosé of Pinot Noir, very drinkable, very easy to drink, and you don't get drunk if you drink the whole bottle. So here's to Sojourn 2021 rosé.
I like that you don't get drunk drinking the whole bottle.
Right, exactly, Tim. Yeah.
So next up is Maria Viella. Maria is the newest member of our staff. She's our accountant from Audit Prep. And we especially love Maria because she releases our paychecks. So go for it, Maria.
Hello, everyone. So I picked a children's book, and this is a book that my daughter, that is 9 years old, really, really enjoys. It's called Ivy and Bean. This book is written by Annie Barrows and illustrated by Sophie Blackall. And it's a really fun story. And the reason why my daughter likes it is because it's about two friends. And one friend, they're the opposite. So one is very energetic and always wants to try new things. And the other friend is very quiet, loves to read. It's just the opposite. And she thinks just following through and going on all the adventures is really fun. And in this book, they actually go and try ballet. And so they end up finding out that if they put a lot of hard work into it, that they actually do really well and they have fun. And through this is how they find each other and they become best friends. So that's my book. And then drink, I love coffee. So this is this particular iced latte I got from Phil's Coffee, but honestly, I like any kind of coffee. My oldest daughter is a barista, so we do tasting of coffees, and this is one of my favorites.
Phil's is for people who are really coffee lovers. That is really highly rated. So you're getting the best of the best going there.
That's what I've heard too, Tim. I like some Phil's. Phil's coffee is good.
So next up is our development staff, which is run by Vice President of Development, Ben Smithick. So Ben, what are you thinking these days? What are you recommending?
A great book recommendation, Maria. So we're all concerned about the state of the economy, about inflation, from gas to groceries, even Thanksgiving meals. all of us are being impacted by inflation. And naturally, for my holiday book recommendation, I chose Inflation, What Is It? Why Is It Bad? And How to Fix It, which was published in April by Encounter Books and was authored by Steve Forbes, economist Nathan Lewis, and journalist Elizabeth Ames. And the book really dives into how we've arrived at what's really the worst inflationary crisis in our country in more than 40 years, and describes how policymakers at the national level are really making things worse. The authors attribute a combination of reckless spending at the national level and also the Fed's printing too much money as major threats to inflation. And what's great about the book is they also present a path forward for policymakers to really get inflation under control, and also what the average American can do to protect their own money in this environment. And what's also great about the book is that it's really easy to read. Anybody can pick it up and learn a lot from it. So I'd recommend it to anyone. And for my drink recommendation, it's similar to Maria. Maria likes coffee, and so do I. I frequent the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, which is prominent here in Southern California. And they have a cookie butter, I think it's called a cookie butter blended drink, which is mixed with coffee. That recipe is just great. It's if you need a kick, it's a good afternoon drink. Lance, you would like it, I think.
That sounds like something
right
Lance
up my
would
alley,
like.
Dan.
Decaf, maybe. Great. And now I'd like to pass it along to my colleague Laura Dannerbeck, PRI's events consultant, for her holiday book recommendation.
Thanks, Ben. So I just finished The Magnificent Lives of Marjorie Post, written by Alison Pataki, and I'd never heard anything about her prior to reading the book. It was recommended by a dear friend of mine who reads everything. It's about Marjorie Merriweather Post, and she was kind of a first of her kind. Born back in the early 1900s, she was intelligent and thoughtful, hardworking, and as an only child, she'd worked alongside her father to create Post cereals, which was in competition with Kellogg's at that time. She learned the business, and she ultimately served on the Post board of directors before women really had a role in anything on that level. She obviously was a serial heiress. She loved beauty, and she was the first to admit that she had been blessed with many beautiful things over the course of her life. But the thing I really loved about her is that she used her inheritance to enrich everything that she touched: the art world, the architectural world, political world, the literary world. She was famous for hosting world leaders and society legends. And one of the most fascinating parts was that during the Cold War, she served as the first U.S. ambassadress in the USSR. And she went over the top officials of the Kremlin just by her ability to kind of work a room and create these friendships. She counted numerous presidents and world leaders among her closest friends. I thought it was a really fascinating historical biography of a woman before her time. Oh, so my cocktail. So my cocktail that I would recommend for the holidays is a Kir Royale. And it's the creme de cassis, and then with some champagne or sparkling wine. And for Christmas and Thanksgiving, we always drop a cranberry in it and a little sprig of rosemary just to make it a little festive. But that's what I will be serving Thanksgiving and Christmas. And happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Thanks so much, Laura. That was a great recommendation and great drink. My colleague, Devin Mirsky, PRI's events and development manager, is currently on European vacation, traveling to France and Ireland and a couple of other locations. And we're all very jealous that she's away. And she actually pre-recorded her selection. And through the magic of podcasting, I'll pass it over to Devin.
I'm going to recommend the Bible since it is the most influential book in history, and I feel like it's important to get through it. I'm still currently working on it, but at the moment, I would say my favorite has been Exodus so far. Exodus is such an influential book with the 10 Commandments and all the great stories, so I would definitely say that's been my favorite so far. For my drink recommendation, I would have to go with a smaller winery up in the Paso Robles area called Opolo. My family and I became members, and we've enjoyed them for many years now.
So our next group is Marketing and Communications, which is headed up by Tim Anaya and my co-host for the podcast. So I remember once I was doing a radio interview, and the host said to me, Now, as a former book editor, Rowena, I got to ask you what you're currently reading these days. And I was completely flummoxed by the question because the book I was reading was Crazy Rich Asians. I couldn't tell her that. I can't actually remember what I came up with, but I mentioned it to Tim, and Tim's advice to me was, Ro, you just have to have the Bible in your back pocket when you get asked. That's what all the politicians say. So it's great that Devin is really reading the Bible, and she's proud to be reading it, and it's great. So here's Tim, who has, as we all know, all the right answers to everything.
I don't know about that, but I probably have the most. No, I probably have the most entertaining answers. Hopefully, so my book choice. I always try to go a little out of left field with my choice. So not too long ago, when I was scrolling through the Instagram, I saw this kind of grandmotherly looking gal, and she was on talking a mile a minute, telling you how you could make breakfast sandwiches ahead, and you could, have them for months and months. You could freeze them. And she went through kind of the assembly line, how you did. And I thought, that's very interesting. Who is this woman? And she calls her advice hacks. And so I started looking her up, and she has become an internet star with all of her hacks. She also taught me, I never knew this. Did you know that you can lower the height of the top rack of your dishwasher? And that's how you fit in wine glasses and taller things. And she shows everybody how to do it. So on Instagram, she goes by Babs, but her name is Barbara Costello. And her book is just out called Celebrating with Babs. And she goes through any holiday you can think of, any celebration throughout the year. She has a hack to make the dinner or the cocktail or the dessert and make it very easy. So I highly recommend, if you're doing any entertaining, as I do a lot of, check out Babs and Celebrating with Babs. Now, for my cocktail, earlier this year, we had the great opportunity. We've been so excited that my former boss, Connie Conway, is now a member of Congress. And she took the short term to fill out the term of Devin Nunes. So she's only in Congress for 6 months because they eliminated the district and redistricting. And so we had the great opportunity to have dinner with her in Sacramento over the summer. And when we all get together, it's all trouble, of course, when we all get together. But Connie is a fan of the bubbles. And so when we were having dinner, we were going through, what are we going to drink? And they said, well, what's on the menu is her favorite, which is Veuve Clicquot. Now, she loves La Grande Dame, which is the more expensive version. So that actually was the first time I'd ever had it. And it was, you're thinking the kind of acid that they pour into a mimosa as champagne, get that out of your head. It really, to me, was quite the drinking experience when I had that. And last night when I went to Costco, and they sell it at Costco, it's $49 a bottle. I bought 3 bottles for the holiday season. So I'm drinking, and I recommend Veuve Clicquot. Next, we have the great Emily Humple, who, when Evan Harris ditched us and went off to whatever he's doing today in the PR world, we were so fortunate to have Emily come and be our deputy communications director. And she's doing a fantastic job blogging and bothering reporters to cover our work and in every other way. So, Emily, what's your favorite book that you recommend this holiday season?
That was quite the introduction. Thank you, Tim. I'm happy to be here. My book recommendation has to be The Lord of the Rings, Part 1, Fellowship of the Ring. These are my favorite series, J.R.R. Tolkien. The first time I read this book was actually in 5th grade. I didn't really know what I was reading, but my dad told me I couldn't watch the movies until I read the book. And so I was reading it in 5th grade, but I was one of those bookworms that was always in the library reading books that were way too difficult for me. So I would have to say the reason I like this book so much is because, in a time where everyone has short attention spans now. And so books have become pieces of work that are really easy to read, or, you get to the point fast, or you get through the story quickly. It takes a very patient and diligent reader to read Tolkien. And I love the challenge. He really takes his time on the details and on his world building. And there's always something special about the little treasures and nuggets that you get in books that the movie watchers don't get. So all the little pieces in the books that you're like, I know that happened, but you don't, because all you did was watch the movie. And who doesn't love a story about hobbits and rings of power? 10 out of 10 recommend. My drink of choice. So I know Tim was hating on mimosas earlier, but I am a huge brunch gal. And I love mimosas so much. And one of my favorite holiday drinks is an apple cider mimosa. So you do some champagne, hopefully not some of the cheap $6 bottle champagne, but you spend a little bit more money on something nicer, and mix it with apple cider and a little bit of cinnamon, and it is perfect. So that is my drink of choice.
Well, unfortunately, our graphic designer extraordinaire, Dana Beagle, couldn't be with us today, but she said along her book choice is The Diamond Eye by one of her favorite authors, Kate Quinn. She says the book is based on the life of the historical World War II female sniper, and she says the fun read follows her experiences in training, war, friendship, and love.
So for our last group, PRI's wonks, our writers and our scholars, we have a few that aren't here today, but they're wonking away. So Tim has graciously taken down their recommendations. But we're going to start off with Lance Izumi, who is our Senior Director of Education. Here you go, Lance.
Well, thanks very much, Ro. I really appreciate that. Before I get on to my recommendation for a holiday book, I'm going to first second the nomination that Sally made of Her Majesty. As PRI's resident Anglophile, I can tell you that I own Her Majesty. It's one of my very favorite books. And, it is really like the true photographic, I think, memory of the Queen. And so when the Queen passed away, I posted on Facebook and on Instagram photo that I had taken actually several months ago of me actually holding up a copy of Her Majesty. And
oh my gosh.
So I posted that in recognition of the Queen's passing, and as my remembrance of the Queen, because she meant a lot to me, and her passing really affected me. And so actually there were a lot of tears actually. So when the Queen passed, and that book that Sally recommended, Her Majesty, really is the way I think that if you want to look at the Queen's entire history from her youth, coronation, to her entire long reign, you can't do any worse than Her Majesty. And I will say one last thing before I get to my own pick, is that Emily's pick of The Lord of the Rings is also something that I would choose too. I might actually choose the third of the trilogy, The Return of the King, because that's really my favorite part. I love all three of the books, but that book is really my favorite. And I think that it's really encapsulates Tolkien's vision. That triumph at the end is really fabulous, and of all the protagonists. And I will say that when The Lord of the Rings came out in movie version, I actually went to see The Return of the King literally 12 times in the theater.
Wow.
So I am.
But Lance saw La La Land about 25 times, so it's not the most times he has seen a movie in the
my
theater.
Gosh.
That's right. So anyway, but I'll get on to my pick. My pick is, I'm going to do a bit of self-promotion here. It's my upcoming book entitled The Great Parent Revolt, and it's about critical race theory and how parents, educators, students are fighting critical race theory in the classroom. And critical race theory, for those people who aren't familiar with it, is a Marxist-oriented doctrine which views people as oppressors or oppressed, depending on their particular identification or category, mostly on race. And so, if you're happen to be, let's say, a white male, you would be viewed as being an oppressor, whereas if you are some minority, you will be viewed as being an oppressed person. And so that creates a huge amount of division. There's probably no greater scourge of indoctrination going on in our nation's schools than the curse of critical race theory. And so we have this wonderful book that is co-authored by myself, Wen-Yuan Wu, and also our own Mackenzie Richards, who this is going to be her first book. And so the three of us have co-authored this book together, and it features profiles of all these different people who are fighting a battle against critical race theory at the grassroots level. And so we profile people like Ji Van Fleet, who is a Chinese immigrant mom who experienced the Cultural Revolution firsthand and saw how indoctrination in a totalitarian government was able to destroy basically an entire society. And she worries that that's what America is heading towards. We have someone like Azra Nomani, who is a Muslim woman, mom, whose father marched with Mahatma Gandhi in the fight against colonialism in India. And we have people like Gabs Clark, a poor African-American woman who stood up against her own school, her son's school, that was preventing him from graduating because they were forcing him to take a very woke critical race theory oriented class in order to graduate, and he refused. And so she ended up taking the school to court, and has, things are looking very good for her, and she's stood up for her beliefs. So this is an incredible book that is much beyond the usual theoretical ivory tower type of book that people are used to when they're looking at books involving critical race theory. This is about people's stories, about their individual experiences, fighting for freedom, liberty, and the ability of their children to learn without being indoctrinated. So I think it's a great book, and it's very inspiring. And I hope people will get it, which when it comes out next month, I believe, in time for Christmas. So also, I will say that my drink of choice, I'm like some of the others on this podcast, I don't drink alcoholic beverages, but my favorite drink around the holiday time is hot apple cider. And so I made a batch for Tim and another friend of ours recently, and that involves a gallon of apple juice poured into a pot, put in half a cup of brown sugar, bring it to a boil, and I prefer then mulling spices from World Market. And so I pour in the mulling spices, and probably about 6 tablespoons of mulling spices, and let that simmer for maybe a couple hours. And it comes out, terrific, I think. And I think Tim even approved of it as well.
I can attest, it's terrific. Thank you, Lance, for your recommendations there. So our Steve Smith, who you may have read, and he writes great pieces about California's exploding crime problems. He couldn't join us today, but he sent his recommendations, and he recommends, and I agree with both of these choices, Seabiscuit, the great book by Laura Hillenbrand, and her other big, very popular work, Unbroken, which both, of course, became movies. Seabiscuit, of course, is about the legendary horse. Unbroken is about Louis Zamperini, who is the Olympian and the soldier turned POW, and might I add, USC Trojan. Both are terrific books. She is an amazing author, and she has you at the edge of your seat when reading her book. So I agree with Steve's choices. Highly recommend both of those books. So with that, we now bring in the man who, I don't know how he finds enough hours in the day to do all of the great work that he does. I think we counted it up when we had our 5th anniversary. Wayne is either our second most guest ever. I think it was the second most guest second most appearances ever on this podcast is our Wayne Weingarten, who's our economist. He does all our great environmental policy. He runs our Center for Medical Economics and Innovation. Wayne, I don't know where you find time to read a book for pleasure, but the floor is yours.
Most of my pleasure reading is actually practical, but two things. I'm going to take a note from Lance's playbook, and one, when Tim, when you were talking about your book, and that does sound fascinating, but breakfast made 2 months ago does not sound appetizing to me. I think
you freeze it, of course,
and frozen.
Although you could have moldy eggs if you'd like to just put them in the refrigerator.
But going, before I talk about my recommendation, and obviously, Tolkien is an amazing book. But for people who are interested in that genre, Bernard Cornwell's books, The Last Kingdom or the Saxon Chronicles is a fantastic series. They made a really good series of that on Netflix. Didn't do justice to the books, but that's an amazing series and teaches you a little bit of history of how England came to be, which in and of itself I think is interesting. For my actual recommendation, I guess took a page out of Ben's playbook for this one, but when you look at what's happening around us, not just in how bad the economy is now, but when you look at Gen Z and the millennials and how socialism seems to be coming back, and on kind of the conservative side, there's this rise in nationalism. And so I started rereading, to me, one of the greatest economists ever. All economists should be measured against him, Thomas Sowell. And in 1980, he wrote one of the best economics books ever, Knowledge and Decisions, which I'm actually rereading right now. And I think that is such a fantastic book because it actually defends the free market economy. It defends capitalism by talking about knowledge and talking about how do you use knowledge appropriately. And ultimately, why does socialism fail? Why does industrial policy fail? And it's because you actually don't have the knowledge to be able to do kind of what those plans are all about. And so I think that this going back to basics and understanding how the economy works, where prosperity comes from. And Thomas Sowell, this one book pushes that forward. And it's a challenging read, but it's worth it because Thomas Sowell is an amazing writer, and he explains why that in different situations, different types of knowledge are necessary. And when you need different types of knowledge, that creates the need for individuals. And it's not the government versus the private sector. It's the government is one decision maker, but so are large corporations, small businesses, individuals. And so you need the right person, the right entity applied at the right time. It's a fantastic book that really helps people understand what policies we should be implementing long term. In terms of my drink recommendation, as I guess the PRI folks know, I'm not a fancy drinker, so I'm very much either a Scotch or a whiskey. And I guess we just took a trip to Ireland and took a tour of the Jameson factory. And I guess in honor of that, I've been drinking Jameson for about a year now. And so I guess that'll be my recommendation.
Well, hear, Wayne. So our Pam Lewison, who writes great work about agriculture policy in California and the West Coast, she sent along her recommendation, and her book she recommends is The Imperfectionists. And she says it's a novel set in Rome that follows the private lives of reporters, editors, and executives at a newspaper, and they each have their part to play in trying to keep the struggling publication alive. So Pam recommends, check out The Imperfectionists. As I think we mentioned earlier, Mackenzie Richards couldn't be with us today, but like with Devin, through the magic of podcasting, we have her recommendation for her book and her cocktail recommendation right here.
But my book recommendation is actually in the fantasy realm. I don't typically read fantasy books, but I happen to listen to this one. A close friend of mine who is one of the most well-read people that I know recommended the book to me. And it's The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. And the book reads like an epic fantasy, or like the classic epics, like, the Odyssey. And the story follows a young man who loses his family, and he's a musician, and he dreams of controlling the wind. Aside from like the fantasy parts, what I enjoy most about the book is sort of how Quoth like uses his cunning to approach these like really difficult circumstances that he's put in. And so it's just like a really interesting and fascinating way of approaching fantasy, just from like the perspective of overcoming like struggle and difficult circumstances.
Mackenzie, what is your drink recommendation for everybody this holiday season?
Oh dear. So I don't drink, but I did my undergrad at Brigham Young University. And in Utah, there is a booming culture of soda shops. Everyone goes in the morning. It's like a big thing to go get their sody and all these wacky flavors. And my favorite is Raspberry Dream, which is like a Diet Dr. Pepper, a regular Dr. Pepper with raspberry puree and coconut cream. And so that's pretty easy to make at home, and it's pretty good. So that's my recommendation.
And sounds very holiday-like.
Yeah, I mean, the raspberry, the red, the cream, it works. It works for Thanksgiving. So
that's great, Mackenzie. And where can we get the book authored by Lance and Mackenzie, Tim?
Well, when it's available, you can get it at Amazon.com or your favorite online booksellers.
Finally, my pick. I've got two picks, actually. So the first is kind of wonky. It was my favorite book this year, and it's called Wanting: The Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life by Luke Burgess. I know it's wonky. So the book is about the nature of desire. Now, I have an interest in this because as a think tanker, we're in the business of selling ideas. So mimetic desire is actually a theory proposed by the theologian Rene Girard. And Peter Thiel, by the way, is a big fan of his. He was a student of his at Stanford. Now, the popular notion is that desire comes from within. But Girard says, no, you desire what people around you desire. So you guys remember the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife or their house or their ox, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Girard turns that upside down and he says, it's not about the object of desire, but it's actually about whatever it is your neighbor is wanting that makes you want it too. So I thought it was fascinating. And the book, again, is called Wanting by Luke Burgess. And I thought I would choose a children's book, too, because I love children's books and I collect them. So I recommend Mortals and Immortals of Greek Mythology, written by French author Françoise Rahmoul and illustrated by French artist Charlotte Guestou. Charlotte Guestou is one of my favorite illustrators. She makes it all magical. And if your kids love Greek mythology like I did growing up, I think you'll really love this book. Finally, my favorite drink is Cayman's Writer's Block for the obvious reasons. Nothing worse on the job than having writer's block. And unfortunately, I don't think Cayman makes it anymore, but I happen to have a 26 bottle that was gifted to me by my dear friend and our creative director, Dana Beagle. She designs all of the beautiful things that we produce. And I've been nursing this bottle for about a year now using Corvan, and that's a device that pumps argon gas into your wine so you could have just a glass of the bottle without actually degrading it. So that's the end of our podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening. So from our PRI family to your
Happy Thanksgiving.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.